Before I begin, I just want to take a moment and ask everyone, but particularly the graduates, to imagine that in addition to soon being handed your diploma, you're also handed a magic wand. And with that magic wand, you could bring about any change in the world you would like to bring about. Take a moment and reflect upon that. What would the single most important thing you would like to change about the world be? I'm going to spend most of the rest of my time asking each one of you for your answers. No. I want to talk first about one of the most important things that I have learned that guides both my personal journey through life and my business career. And it may sound simple and even trite, but knowing who I am, knowing my essence, knowing what I believe in most, is a critical guiding light that governs everything I do. And I want to tell you just a couple stories about how I became clear on that. And part of that clarity becomes understanding the process of how I work, what my core values are, as well as my core purpose. When I think about my core process, the way in which I work, I reflect back to when I was a little bit younger than most of you. When I was 17, I was growing up in New York City on Park Avenue, which is a very affluent, wealthy area. And I felt endlessly guilty about growing up in a family that had so much money. I couldn't understand why we had so much and other people had so little. And I left home when I was 17, moved out to California by myself while I was still in high school, and I lived in my car while I went to Santa Barbara High School. A little bit later in my life, I was living in London, and I ended up studying with R.D. Laing. And one of the things that attracted me to R.D. Laing was his passion to try to understand the boundaries between what we call sanity and insanity. Why do we label certain people as crazy and other people not as crazy? Why is there such a huge difference? As was mentioned earlier, I then moved on and started an adult education business that was inspired by Ivan Illich. And Ivan Illich was passionate about making sure that everyone had access to wisdom and education. And this business was about taking anybody who had something they wanted to teach and making it accessible to anybody who wanted to learn. So these classes took place in people's offices, kitchens, virtually anywhere that someone had something they wanted to teach. And I kept noticing the discontinuities in our society. I kept noticing why it is that we're able to grow a lot of food, but yet they're very hungry people. I kept noticing that despite much of what you read and what you hear about how we want to create opportunity, when you actually look at the numbers, we keep moving wealth from the poorest people to the most wealthy people. Why is it that the nation's largest, or actually the world's largest and most powerful company, Walmart, has in many ways, although they're trying hard to change this image, become a symbol for what is worst of business rather than what is best in business? And I looked at all these things and I said, there's this systemic discontinuity where systems keep colliding and not working. And part of my passion is to try to resolve those differences. How do we take these fundamental systems that govern our life and make them work better? One of the things about my values lie at this notion of authenticity. And authenticity for me is transparency in a pretty absolute sense. showing the good and the bad, showing your successes and your failures. One of my favorite talks to give is a talk about the 10 biggest mistakes that I've ever made. And I can tell you that in some ways, the more successful people think you are, the bigger the mistakes you end up making, although people don't like to talk about them. Well, I can tell you that I have made many, many big mistakes that have cost my company probably millions and millions of dollars over the course of time. That doesn't make me a bad person. In some ways, I wouldn't be where I was unless I was willing to take those chances and make those mistakes. So living authentically is, to me, an endless guide for how I aspire to live. To let people see my strengths and my weaknesses, to let people see my successes and my failures. The final part of my essence is to understand my core purpose. What is the one thing that I am most passionate about? And that passion started early in my life. When I was 15, I was marching in Washington against the Vietnam War. When I wrote my first book, How to Make the World a Better Place, I was striving to find answers to those questions. I didn't think that I knew them. Why is it that the poor in the United States are the ones who have the most polluting industries located in their neighborhood? So for me, the passion to create justice and equity in the world is my greatest driver. And for some people, there's a little bit of a disconnect because they think of Seventh Generation as an environmental company, and that is not really what is at its essence. We are focused on the environment, but ultimately as a means through which to create a more just and sustainable world. I want to read a very short thing that also is sort of a paradigm for how I try to live my life, and it comes from a book called The Star Thrower. Some of you might be familiar with it. The story is that one day a man was walking along the beach and he noticed a figure in the distance. As he got closer, he realized the figure was that of a small boy picking something up and gently throwing it into the ocean. Approaching the boy, the man asked, "What are you doing?" The youth replied, "Throwing starfish back into the ocean. The sun is coming up, the tide is going out. If I don't throw them in the ocean, they'll die." The man said, "Don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of thousands of starfish? You can't possibly make a difference." After listening politely, the boy bent down and picked up another starfish and threw it into the surf. Then, smiling at the man, he said, "I made a difference for that one." In contrast to the tremendous challenges that we face in the world, we only make progress incrementally, one piece at a time. And often we get lost in this feeling that these problems are so big. Where do we start? How can we make a difference? And we have to remember that we make a difference one starfish at a time. We don't change things often overnight. On a good day, I think that maybe I use 5% of the potential that I have. On a bad day, I use little or none at all. And sometimes I think I'm exaggerating when I say 5% on a good day. We live in a world where we celebrate the efforts of companies and organizations to stop global warming, to reduce their reliance on sweatshops, to produce products with less chemicals, to try to manage the outrageous amounts of money that are paid to CEOs. But quite frankly, we live in a world where doing less bad is never going to get us to where we want to go. And we have really created these stories that we tell and we talk about. When I was meeting with the head of Greenpeace a couple weeks ago in Burlington, I said, "What is it that you want to see happen in the world?" And he said, "I want to stop global warming." And I said, "That's great, but what do you want to see in the world after you stop global warming?" Stopping bad things are not often what motivate us and generate the will to bring about change. Seventh generation as a set of sort of guiding principles that guide what we do as a company. We call them global imperatives. And one of the things about business is that business has become incredibly obsessed in thinking short term. And one of the things that we've learned as a company, that to have the impact we want to have in the world, we have to think about where we want the world to be 50 or 100 years from now, not where we want to be next quarter, in the next 100 days. And that's challenging. We often don't think that far out. But I really believe that being able to think about where we want to be 50 to 100 years from now allows us to create the kind of possibilities that the world really needs us to create. Some of the global imperatives that we have as a company include producing a world that is rich in value as opposed to a world that is rich in artifacts. Developing a system of peace, equity, justice, and love for all planetary beings. Engaging all people in personal development that creates the highest levels of consciousness. Ensuring globally that natural resources are used and renewed at rates that are always below their rate of depletion. Now, someone might say, why is a business concerned with those types of things? How in the world can you make money if those are the things that you're focused on? And I believe, and we have shown, although it took us a long time to get there, seventh generation has been growing at about 40% a year for the past 5 years, and we believe that that growth rate will accelerate to 80 to 100% in the coming 3 years. That the world has gone through a change that most of us have not yet awakened to. The world has reached a point where businesses that are committed to making the world a better place, to creating a sustainable future, are the businesses that will succeed and be rewarded in the years and decades to come. Now, I can give you all the facts and figures to support that. And if you're interested, the website for my book, WhatMattersMost.biz, has dozens of pages of all those statistics. But it is something that I believe and something that I have experienced and something that I believe creates a possibility for all of you that may not have existed 5 or 10 years ago. I'm just skipping some of these pages here so that I don't keep you here all day. I want to, I guess I want to give you perhaps one final thought. And everybody likes quoting famous people. It's sort of a fun thing to do. But one of the quotes that has stuck with me is from Einstein. And Einstein said, "You can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it." It's a strange thing that he said, nothing that he ever really talked about again. And one of the things that I have experienced most powerfully in my life, and it goes back to the notion of we all use a small part of our potential, is that the opportunity lies outside of the patterns that we have created for ourselves. I often reflect on what I do, and I see that I do much of the same thing day after day after day, and I create the same pattern. And when I stop, reflect, and become aware of that, and start to be more conscious, I realize that all the opportunity exists mostly outside of the patterns that I live in day to day. And hopefully, some of this resonates with you. Hopefully, some of this has meaning for you, and hopefully, some of this will help guide the rest of your journey in life. The world will only become the place it needs to be if all of you who are graduating today seize that opportunity. That doesn't mean that you all have to go fight wars and end poverty. The opportunities of making the world a better place, as I have found, reside just as much in business as they do anywhere else. You can make that contribution to the world in anything you choose to do. The notion that some people in certain jobs and certain careers are the ones designated to do that, I think, is dead wrong. Every one of you and everyone in this room can contribute to that possibility. And the world can't afford to not have you do that. If you don't take up that mantle, if you don't see that opportunity, if you don't generate the passion and will inside yourself to help create a world that most of us can't even imagine today, it will be a tremendous lost opportunity. And I don't hold that over you as a threat. I hold that over you as a possibility that might be larger than any of you have yet imagined. I want to end by reading a short piece from a book called A Short Guide to a Happy Life. And I'm going to return to something perhaps a little bit more specific. This is written by Anna Quinlan. She wrote, "I suppose the best piece of advice I could give anyone is pretty simple. Get a life, a real life, not a manic pursuit of the next promotion or a bigger paycheck or a larger house. Get a life in which you notice the smell of salt water pushing itself on the breeze over the dunes. A life in which you stop and watch a red-tailed hawk circle over a pond. Get a life in which you pay attention to the baby as she scowls with concentration as she tries to pick up a Cheerio with her thumb and first finger. Turn off your cell phone, turn off your regular phone. Keep still, be in the present. Get a life in which you're not alone. Find people you love and who love you, and remember that love is not a leisure, it is work. Each time you look at your diploma, remember that you are still a student, learning every day how to be a better human. Send an email, write a letter, kiss your mom, hug your dad. Get a life in which you are generous. Look around at the azaleas making fuchsia starbursts in the springtime. Look at the moon hanging silver in a black day on a cold night, and realize that life is truly glorious and that you have no business taking it for granted. Care so deeply about its goodness that you want to spread it around. Take the money that you would have spent on beer and give it to charity. Work in a soup kitchen, tutor a 7th grader, and remember that we all want to do well, but we will not do well if we do not do good. Life is short. Remember that too. Thank you. Good luck. Congratulations on your achievement.